Usually when we think about human progress, we tend to picture this nice, straight, clean line.
Right, like building a house or something.
Exactly. You start with the foundation. The wheel, the printing press, the steam engine, and you just keep adding floors.
It's an upward trajectory.
Yeah, an upward trajectory of tools making our physical lives easier, more efficient. It feels safe, predictable even.
But then you step into the world of artificial intelligence.
And suddenly that clean upward line just shatters entirely.
Yeah.
We aren't just building better tools anymore. We're staring into a digital mirror.
And it is asking us a terrifying question.
It really is. It's asking us what we actually are. And that shattered mirror is exactly where we're pointing our attention today on this deep dive.
It's a heavy one tonight.
It is. So to everyone listening out there, whether you are driving through the dark or just sitting up late with us, welcome. We are broadcasting late tonight, and if you listen closely, you might even hear the Kansas wind rattling the glass here in the studio at Chesterton Radio in Atchison.
The perfect atmosphere for the stack of sources we have to work through.
Definitely. We are looking at a comparative exploration of two major papal encyclicals, and they are separated by exactly 135 years.
First, Pope Leo XIII's Rerum Novarum.
Right, from 1891. And second, a brand new document from 2026, Pope Leo XIV's Magnifica Humanitas.
But the way we are approaching this is really unique.
Yeah, we are filtering these historical texts through this incredibly insightful commentary that applies the philosophy of the early 20th century thinker G.K. Chesterton.
And his contemporary, Hilaire Belloc.
Right. Applying their thought to these exact texts. The central mission tonight is to ask, what happens to the human person when civilization is radically reorganized by new technology?
But before we jump into the history, I think we should pause on a word you just threw out there.
Which one? Encyclical.
Yeah, because if you aren't Catholic or, a church historian, it might just sound like insider jargon.
Good point. What actually is an encyclical? Is it just a memo, like a legal document? How should you and I and the listener be reading this?
That is a crucial clarification. An encyclical is essentially a circular letter sent by a pope to the bishops of the world.
And by extension to all people of goodwill, right?
Exactly. It's one of the highest forms of papal teaching. But historically, they aren't written just to say hello or offer some mild advice.
They usually drop when something is very wrong.
They are almost always deployed in response to a massive global crisis. When the very foundations of society are shaking, an encyclical is meant to be a definitive moral anchor.
So when we look at these two documents tonight, we are actually looking at responses to two of the greatest earthquakes in human history.
And the historical coincidence here is just wild.
It really is. You have two popes, both of them named Leo. Both of them are standing at the absolute edge of two entirely different, world-altering revolutions.
In 1891, the first Leo is staring down the barrel of the mechanical industrial revolution.
And now, in 2026, the second Leo is facing the digital AI revolution. And despite the century and a half between them, they are asking the exact same question.
Namely, are we building tools to serve humanity? Or are we rebuilding humanity to serve the tools?
Our sources set this up beautifully. They describe this vivid picture of historical continuity. When the name Leo was spoken at the Vatican again in 2026, people who know their history didn't immediately think of, stained glass or cathedrals.
No, they thought of factories.
Right, because in 1891, Europe was literally covered in the smoke and soot of the Industrial Revolution. Society was being violently reshaped.
And the commentary makes the point that today, in 2026, we don't have coal smoke. The sky is clear.
Well, mostly clear.
Fair enough.
Yeah.
But we have this invisible, omnipresent web of algorithms, neural networks, and data centers covering the entire globe.
It's a different kind of smog.
It is. And the evolution of the mechanization is the core distinction we have to keep in mind throughout this entire deep dive.
The jump from muscle to mind.
Exactly. The first machine age, the one Leo XIII confronted, was about the mechanization of physical labor.
The steam engine replacing human muscle.
The power loom replacing the weaver's hands. But the second machine age, the one Leo XIV addresses today, is the mechanization of intellectual labor.
It's AI replacing cognition, analysis, writing, decision-making, even art. I want to make that distinction really concrete for the listener because it's a massive leap. Let me throw a thought experiment out there.
Go for it.
It's one thing when a forklift replaces your ability to carry 50 heavy boxes across a warehouse.
Sure.
You look at that forklift and say, great, my back doesn't hurt today, I'll drive the forklift. You are still the mind directing the machine.
The human is the architect of the action.
Right. But it is an entirely different universe when a machine replaces your ability to make a judgment call, to analyze a complex problem, or to create a piece of poetry. Doesn't that fundamentally change our relationship to our own minds?
It absolutely does, because when you replace muscle with a machine, you remain at the helm. But when you replace the mind with a machine, you are outsourcing the very faculty that makes you human.
You are handing over your agency.
You are. And this brings us directly to a central premise in Pope Leo XIV's 2026 document, Magnifica Humanitas, which our sources emphasize heavily.
Illusion of neutrality.
Precisely. The commentary talks about this pervasive Silicon Valley myth that technology is just an empty vessel.
Oh, right. The idea that a tool is just a tool.
Yeah, that its morality depends entirely on how the end user applies it. You know, a hammer can build a house or it can break a window.
But the encyclical aggressively pushes back on this, doesn't it?
It does. It says technology is never morally neutral. It absorbs the intentions, the appetites, the blind spots, and the underlying philosophies of the people who engineer it.
There's this spectacular line from the source material that I want to quote. The locomotive did not invent greed, and AI did not invent pride. It just gave pride a server farm.
That is a very Chestertonian way to phrase it. It cuts right to the heart of the issue.
It really does. So if you engineer an algorithm with the express purpose of maximizing user engagement.
And the data shows that human beings engage most deeply with outrage, fear, and tribalism.
Right. Then that algorithm will naturally prioritize and amplify outrage. That is not a neutral tool.
Not at all. It has a specific behavioral worldview built into its architecture.
So an algorithm designed to keep me scrolling until 2 in the morning isn't just a hammer sitting passively on a workbench. It's a system actively trying to manipulate my psychology.
Yes. The encyclical notes that when tools become this powerful, when they dictate what information matters, what is seen and what is discarded, they cease to be mere tools.
They become what the text calls a technocratic paradigm.
Exactly. They impose a logic of hyper-efficiency and control on everything they touch, including human beings.
Okay, so if we are going to fully understand why this mechanization of the mind in 2026 is so alarming to modern thinkers, we really need to understand what actually happened to the human person when we mechanized the body.
We have to step back into the smog of the 19th century.
The crisis that birthed rerum novarum. The sources point out something fascinating here. To our modern eyes, the Industrial Revolution just looks like inevitable progress.
We look back and see railroads, steamships, electric lights.
Yeah, and we think, the start of modern prosperity. We see it as a triumph. But for the people actually living through it, it was profoundly disorienting.
It was a trauma. It was a complete reordering of time and space.
Walk me through that, because that historical context is vital here.
Well, the Industrial Revolution didn't just introduce new machines. It destroyed the organic rhythms of human life that had existed for millennia.
Before the factory, human life was tied to the seasons.
The weather, the daylight, villages and local communities were the center of gravity.
Right. If you were a farmer or an artisan, your work was dictated by the sun and the specific task in front of you. But then the villages emptied out.
People poured into these massive, overcrowded, polluted urban centers like Manchester or London.
And time itself fundamentally changed.
Historians actually call it the rise of time discipline. You weren't working until the job was done. You were laboring according to the factory whistle.
The synchronized clock took over.
You were suddenly moving at the pace of the machine. Human beings had to adjust their biology and their lives to systems built for mechanical efficiency, rather than the systems adjusting to humanity.
And this led to the core crisis that Pope Leo XIII addressed in 1891. He saw that men were being transformed from craftsmen into components.
Men as components. That is the exact phrase the sources highlight.
The 1891 text explicitly states that working for gain is honorable, right? Earning a livelihood is a good thing.
But misusing men as things, or valuing them solely for their physical power, is shameful.
I want to break down the mechanics of that. How does a craftsman actually become a component?
Think about the nature of work in the pre-industrial era. A shoemaker, for instance.
Okay, sure.
He might make an entire shoe. He selects the leather, he cuts it, he stitches it, he attaches the sole. He sees the process from raw material to finished product.
He has a relationship with the object.
Exactly. But the industrial assembly line fragmented that labor into abstracted, repeatable tasks.
So instead of making a shoe, you are just the guy who hammers one specific nail into the heel.
Yes, you hit the nail. Over and over, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. You are no longer a creator. You are an interchangeable labor unit.
If you break your arm, the factory owner simply slots another laborer into your spot to hit the nail.
You have been reduced to a biological cog in a mechanical process.
Which brings us to the massive property debate in Rerum Novarum. Because the conditions in these factories were so awful, so degrading, that radical remedies were being proposed at the time.
Specifically, socialism. Karl Marx had published the Communist Manifesto a few decades prior. Revolution was genuinely in the air.
It was. And Rerum Novarum takes a very specific, and to some modern ears, a very surprising stance on this.
It does. Impartially speaking, the text mounts a vigorous defense of private property and a direct refutation of the socialist proposal to abolish it.
The encyclical argues that transferring property from private individuals to the state is emphatically unjust.
Let me play devil's advocate here on behalf of the listener.
Go ahead.
If I'm a factory worker in 1891, I'm coughing up coal dust, I'm working 80 hours a week for pennies, and I'm watching a few robber barons hoard all the wealth.
Yeah.
If I hear a pope defending private property, that sounds a lot like he is just defending the billionaire factory owner's right to keep exploiting me. Why wouldn't state redistribution be exactly what is needed to protect the worker?
That is precisely the trap the encyclical seeks to avoid. It isn't descending the monopoly of property by a few ultra-rich industrialists.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, it is defending the nature of property for the ordinary person. It leans heavily into what philosophers call natural law.
Let's do and explain it like I'm 5 on natural law.
Good idea. Natural law is basically the idea that human beings have an inherent nature, a built-in design, and that our rights and morals are derived from that nature, not just invented by governments.
So the argument in 1891 is that the desire to own something, to possess a piece of the world permanently, isn't just some capitalist invention.
No, it's a fundamental biological and psychological part of having a human intellect.
How so? Why does having an intellect require owning things?
Well, think about an animal. An animal acts on immediate instinct, survival, reproduction. A dog will eat a bone that is right in front of it, but a dog doesn't claim legal title to the yard to ensure it has bones next year.
That makes sense. Animals only use what is immediately before them.
But humans have reason. We can fathom the future. We can plan. Because we can foresee tomorrow's needs, we need to possess things not just for momentary use, but in a stable and permanent way.
The text says that when a person engages in labor, their express intention is to acquire a right to the wage and the right to dispose of it however they see fit.
If you save your wages and buy a little plot of land, that land is literally just your wages in another form.
Exactly. To have the state come and absorb that land would be to rob the worker of their own past labor.
But the argument goes even deeper into human psychology. The encyclical says that when a person cultivates land or creates something, they leave the impress of their personality on it.
The impress of personality, that is a wild concept.
It is. Let me see if I have this right. If I spend 3 weeks carving a chair out of wood from a tree on my own land, I've left the impress of my personality on that chair.
Yes, it is an extension of your creativity, your effort, your mistakes, your skill. It bears your mark.
But if I stand on an assembly line and pull a lever 500 times a day to drop a rivet into a chassis that I don't own for a company I have no stake in.
Where is your personality?
Exactly, where is it?
It vanishes. That is precisely the crisis of alienation that the Industrial Revolution birthed. Marx saw it too, though he proposed a different solution. The worker was alienated from the product of their labor, from the means of production, and ultimately from their own creative nature.
So if Leo XIII rejected the socialist model of the state taking over, what was his actual solution? He didn't just say, property is good, socialism is bad, good luck in the coal mines.
No, his solutions were quite radical for the time, and they really laid the groundwork for modern Catholic social teaching.
First, he demanded fair wages.
And he defined a fair wage very specifically. It wasn't just whatever rock-bottom price the free market would bear.
Right. It was an amount sufficient to support a frugal, well-behaved worker, their spouse, and their children, with enough left over to allow for savings.
He wanted them to save so they could buy their own property. He wanted to turn wage earners into owners. Widespread ownership was the goal.
And second, he demanded regulated working hours, time for religious duties, and rest, specifically Sunday rest.
This was crucial to remind the worker that they are a soul, not just a labor unit. A machine doesn't need a day of rest to contemplate the divine or spend time with its family.
A human does.
And third, he advocated for workers' associations. He strongly defended the natural right of workers to form unions or guilds, where workers and employers could mediate disputes and protect the vulnerable from the rapaciousness of unchecked competition.
So, to summarize the 1891 crisis, the massive fear was that men were being treated like machines. They were being reduced to physical components in a system that simply didn't care about their souls or their families.
Correct. That was the first machine age.
But as we transition out of the Victorian smog and into the digital glow of the 2026 encyclical Magnifica Humanitas, the fear shifts completely.
We aren't worried about being treated like machines anymore. We are worried about being replaced by them.
And this is where the commentary from Chesterton Radio gets incredibly intense. The hosts point out that Pope Leo XIV opens his encyclical not with a discussion of economics, but with an ancient, sweeping biblical metaphor.
He says humanity is currently standing at a crossroads, choosing between building a new Tower of Babel or rebuilding the walls of Jerusalem like the prophet Nehemiah.
The Tower of Babel metaphor is profound because it perfectly encapsulates the encyclical's view of our current technological trajectory. Let's unpack the mechanics of that metaphor. What does Babel actually represent in this context?
Well, in the Genesis story, the people of Babel decide to build a tower to the heavens. On the surface, it looks like a magnificent project of human cooperation.
But structurally, it represents centralized power masquerading as human progress.
Yes, it is an immense technological project built entirely on pride, on the desire for total uniformity, and on the claim of human self-sufficiency. They are trying to reach heaven, to achieve godhood without God.
And the punishment for that pride wasn't just that the tower was knocked down. The real punishment was fragmentation.
Exactly. They lost the ability to communicate. They all spoke different languages and were scattered across the earth. The project of absolute uniformity ended in total alienation.
I want to connect this directly to you, the listener, right now, because this is where the 2026 encyclical hits painfully close to home.
Think about your experience on the internet today.
We are, objectively speaking, more connected than any humans in the history of our species. We have instantaneous, zero-latency communication with billions of people. We carry the sum of human knowledge in our pockets.
And yet,
do we understand each other more? Or are we more polarized, more isolated, more anxious, and more fragmented than ever before? Is our digital age, with all its global fiber optics and translation algorithms, actually a technological Babel?
the evidence strongly suggests it is. The encyclical explicitly points out that never in history have men communicated more while understanding each other less.
Babel chose homogenization over true communion. It sacrificed human dignity for the sake of an efficient, towering system.
And this brings us to what the 2026 text identifies as an anthropological crisis.
An anthropological crisis, meaning a crisis of what it actually means to be human.
Yes. It's not just a communication problem, it's a crisis of definition. The encyclical takes direct aim at philosophies like transhumanism and posthumanism.
Okay, let's do another explain it like I'm 5. Transhumanism. This is the word thrown around a lot in Silicon Valley podcasts. What does it actually mean in the context of this encyclical?
Transhumanism is an intellectual and cultural movement that essentially views the human condition, our bodies, our aging, our illnesses, our natural physical and mental limitations, purely as defects.
Or engineering problems.
Exactly. And the goal of transhumanism is to solve, optimize, or completely bypass these limitations through technology. Think neural implants, genetic engineering, mind uploading.
It's the gospel of optimization, the idea that we can upgrade ourselves out of suffering.
Precisely. But the encyclical and the Chesterton Radio commentators draw an incredibly hard, bright line here between intelligence and personhood.
This was the part of the deep dive that really stopped me in my tracks.
It's vital. Modern technologists often conflate intelligence with consciousness. They speak as though consciousness is merely a byproduct of complex computation.
The assumption is that if you just scale up a neural network enough, if you feed it enough parameters and processing power, it will eventually, wake up.
It implies that human beings are, at our core, just wetware. We are biological algorithms.
But the 2026 encyclical pushes back on this with everything it has. It says, hold on a second. AI doesn't have a body.
And because it has no body, it has no vulnerability.
Right. It doesn't feel joy. It doesn't feel the physical sting of pain. It doesn't know what it means to be betrayed by a friend and have to wrestle with the decision to forgive them.
It doesn't make a mistake, feel the hot flash of shame, and use that regret to become a better person.
And those experiences, pain, forgiveness, regret, bodily vulnerability, are not just incidental to being human. They are the core of it.
An AI can simulate empathy with terrifying accuracy. It can scan millions of chat logs and write a script that sounds exactly like a comforting friend. It can say, I understand how hard you are hurting.
But it doesn't understand anything. It has no soul. It has no inner life.
This is the theological core of Magnificat Humanitas. The Pope is warning that if society accepts the premise that man is merely a biological machine, merely an information process system, then the next logical step is inevitable.
Replace him with a more efficient, less messy machine.
If man is only data, he can be optimized. If his mind is only computational labor, he can be entirely automated.
So, property protected the workers' physical labor in 1891. You own the land, you own the fruits of your labor. But how does that apply when the labor isn't physical anymore?
That's the question.
If we start viewing ourselves as just slow algorithms and AI as a vastly faster algorithm, what happens to global power? Who owns the cognitive labor?
That leads us directly into how this technology is reshaping the global economy. The encyclical paints a stark picture of the concentration of power in the digital age, what it calls the new monopolies.
Let's dig into that because the scale is hard to comprehend. In the 19th century, the monopolies were built on physical infrastructure. You had railroad barons, steel magnates, oil tycoons.
Today, the monopolies are built on thought, communication, and cognition itself.
The 2026 text mentions frontier AI, the really advanced, world-changing models. To build and run these models, you need hyperscale energy.
We are talking about tech companies securing dedicated nuclear reactors just to power their server farms.
You need vast, unimaginable data sets, basically scraping every word, image, and song ever uploaded to the internet. And you need billions and billions of dollars in capital.
Which means this power is not democratized. It cannot be built in a garage. It is inherently concentrated in the hands of a very few private transnational companies.
And this is where the commentary brings in Hilaire Belloc in his famous book, The Servile State.
Yes. Belloc and Chesterton championed a philosophy called distributism. They deeply distrusted massive concentrations of power, regardless of whether that power was held by a massive socialist government or a massive capitalist monopoly.
They argued for the defense of ordinary human freedom against structures that are simply too large to be humane. Chesterton called it the danger of gigantism.
The broadcast had a great clarification on this. They said Chesterton's philosophy wasn't just nostalgia for peasant cottages and blacksmiths.
It was a cold, hard recognition that when systems get too big, they crush the individual. And AI threatens to create the greatest concentration of informational power in human history.
If a handful of corporations mediate our communication, our labor, our finance, and eventually our very cognition, civilization becomes incredibly fragile.
Belloc's concept of the servile state was a society where a few people own the means of production and the vast majority are reduced to a state of permanent, wage-dependent servility.
And the 2026 encyclical warns about a new kind of servility. It calls it the architecture of visibility.
Algorithmic social control. Let's break down how that actually works in practice, because architecture of visibility sounds like a sci-fi thriller, but it's just Tuesday on the internet.
It is our daily reality. AI systems now determine what information is amplified and what is suppressed. They determine the parameters of public debate.
But it goes beyond media. Algorithms increasingly determine who gets approved for a mortgage, who gets flagged for a tax audit, who gets paroled from prison, and who gets a job interview.
Let's look at the resume example. You apply for a job. A human doesn't read your resume. An automated tracking system scans it.
Right. And if your resume doesn't hit the exact semantic keywords the AI was trained to look for, you are silently filtered into the trash bin. You never even know you were rejected by a machine.
This creates a society where invisible systems shape our behavior without our explicit knowledge. We begin to alter our lives, the words we use on social media, the way we format our resumes, the way we interact with credit systems, specifically to appease the algorithm.
We are being trained by the machine. Let me put this to the listener. Think about the feudal era. It was a harsh system. But in the feudal era, at least the peasant knew the name of his lord.
If the Lord was cruel, or if the taxes were unjust, you knew whose door to knock on. You knew who to revolt against.
Today, who is deciding what news article you see next? Who trained the algorithm that rejected your loan? You don't know their name. You don't know the parameters of the code. And you absolutely cannot appeal to an algorithm for mercy.
That evaporation of responsibility is terrifying. It is power without accountability.
And there is another hidden layer to this power that the encyclical exposes. We often talk about AI as if it's magic, as if it's immaterial. It's just the cloud. It's clean.
But the text aggressively highlights the hidden human cost behind the magic. This part of the source material is grim, but we have to look at it.
The encyclical explicitly condemns the exploitation required to run this supposedly clean digital economy. It points to children in the developing world mining the lithium and cobalt required for microprocessors and batteries.
And it points to the data labelers, the invisible armies of click workers in poor regions.
To train an AI model, to recognize and filter out toxic content, violence, abuse, horrific imagery, so that Western users have a clean experience, humans have to look at that data first.
The encyclical notes that thousands of workers sit at screens all day, labeling deeply traumatic data for pennies.
Their bodies and minds are literally being worn down, traumatized, so that the computational flow can seem effortless to us.
The 2026 encyclical says that if technology promises emancipation, but is built on a hidden chain of global exploitation, it fundamentally contradicts human dignity. It is a false emancipation.
So it is clear that AI is a tool of immense, unparalleled power, concentrated in the hands of a few, and built on an often invisible foundation of human labor.
But what happens when we let this power operate autonomously?
Not just in social media feeds or HR departments, but in matters of life and death. This brings us to a concept the Pope calls disarming AI.
Yes. This was arguably the most sobering part of the 2026 text, and the sources spent a lot of time on it. The encyclical demands that AI be disarmed from militarized competition.
It specifically addresses the use of autonomous AI in weapon systems. The Holy See argues that delegating lethal decisions to an algorithm violates the core principles of justice and human dignity.
Walk me through the ethics of this, as the encyclical presents it. If a drone is flying over a battlefield and its sensors identify a target, and it decides to fire a missile without a human pulling the trigger,
Who is responsible?
that is the exact question. If a machine decides to use lethal force, where does the moral culpability lie? With the commander who deployed it.
The engineer who coded it 5 years ago, the corporation that sold it. The moral responsibility evaporates into the code.
The commentary synthesizes this perfectly. They note Chesterton's observation that the modern world always grows cruel when it grows abstract.
It's a profound insight. A sword fight is intimate and visceral. You see the humanity of your opponent. A bomber plane is more abstract. You just see coordinates on a map.
But an autonomous drone swarm, selecting its own targets based on a predictive algorithm, removes the human face entirely. It is the ultimate abstraction of violence.
An algorithm cannot possess prudence. It cannot feel the weight of taking a human life. It cannot look at a target and realize, wait, that's not a combatant, that's a civilian, and choose to show mercy.
And, as the broadcast so powerfully states, a machine cannot repent.
A machine cannot repent. That line is just haunting.
If a military system makes a mistake and bombs a hospital, the algorithm doesn't feel guilt. It doesn't face a crisis of conscience. It just updates its parameters, adjusts its weights and biases, and prepares for the next iteration.
And this touches on a broader myth that the encyclical dismantles, the myth of the objective machine.
We have this deep-seated bias that because computers use math, because they process numbers, they must be inherently neutral and fair.
But the text explicitly states that algorithms often present themselves as mathematically objective while actually enforcing the ideological biases, stereotypes, or blind spots of their creators.
Explain how that mechanism works. How does math become biased?
Well, an AI model doesn't generate knowledge from thin air. It learns from training data.
Right.
If you train a predictive policing algorithm on historical arrest records, and those historical records contain decades of human prejudice or systemic profiling against a certain neighborhood, the AI will identify that pattern.
It will then predict that the neighborhood is high risk, dispatching more police there.
Which leads to more arrests, reinforcing the biased data. So the AI just launders the human prejudice and presents it back to us as cold, hard, objective fact.
Exactly. The encyclical says that excluding the vulnerable suddenly becomes cloaked in a veneer of mathematical neutrality. It becomes almost impossible to argue against because, well, the computer said so.
The algorithm gives a numeric score to a human life. To combat this massive centralization and abstraction of power, the encyclical leans heavily on a core Catholic social principle called subsidiarity.
Yes, and this links directly back to the distributism of Chesterton and Belloc.
Let's do a quick definition of subsidiarity for the listener.
Subsidiarity is the principle that decisions should always be made at the most local, decentralized level possible.
A higher central authority, whether that's a national government or a transnational tech monopoly, should not interfere in a community's life if the community can handle it themselves.
Power should be distributed downward, closest to the people affected by it.
So how does the encyclical apply subsidiarity to the digital age?
It argues that data should not be monopolized by a few hyperscale corporations. Data is essentially a record of human life. It is a shared good.
The text demands that innovation must include ethical verification at the design stage by the communities affected, not just as a PR patch once the technology is already deployed and hurting people.
Communities need a say in how these systems are integrated into their neighborhoods, their schools, and their workplaces.
Okay, so we've outlined the massive scale of the challenge here. The technocratic paradigm, the illusion of neutrality, the hidden human costs of data labeling, the terrifying prospect of autonomous weapons, and the gigantism of these new monopolies.
It is a daunting picture.
It is. So if the solution isn't just to smash the servers like 19th century Luddites smashing looms, how do we proceed? How do we rebuild our human walls in the face of this digital babble?
This brings us to our final section and really the emotional core of the Chesterton Radio broadcast. Wonder versus optimization.
The broadcast takes on this incredibly profound, almost mournful tone at the end. They point out that the real ultimate danger of the AI age isn't a sci-fi Terminator scenario.
It's not that machines will suddenly wake up, become conscious, and turn into humans.
The real danger is far more subtle and far more tragic. The danger is that humans will become machine-like.
Exactly. Calculating without wisdom, communicating without true communion, producing without wonder.
And this ties directly into the encyclical's passionate defense of human finitude, our limits. The 2026 text argues that we flourish through our limitations, not despite them.
This is a direct counter to the transhumanist view we discussed earlier, which sees limits as bugs to be fixed. The encyclical argues that suffering, vulnerability, physical fatigue, and failure are precisely the mechanisms that open us up to compassion.
They are what make real relationships possible. Let me ask you, the listener, a question to bring this home. Say you mess up. You deeply hurt a close friend, and you need to apologize to them.
Today, you could easily open an AI prompt and ask it to write a perfectly calibrated, error-free, highly empathetic-sounding apology email.
It will use all the right psychological keywords. It will sound incredibly emotionally mature.
But does that apology actually mean anything?
Right. Where does the meaning of an apology come from? Does it come from the flawless syntax, or does it come entirely from the human effort?
The painful struggle to find the words.
The swallowing of your pride and the vulnerability it took to write it poorly, but sincerely.
For an AI, an error is just a flaw to be optimized out of the system. But for a human, an error and the grueling process of making amends for it is a catalyst for profound moral growth.
If we outsource the messy, difficult, inefficient parts of human interaction to an algorithm, we are outsourcing the very things that make us grow. We are optimizing our humanity away.
This is the clash between the Silicon Valley gospel and what the encyclical calls Christian humanism. The tech gospel says progress equals goodness. If we can upgrade our biology, eliminate friction, and outsource our cognition, we become better.
But the encyclical advocates for a civilization of love. It says that the authentic, more than human, the true upgrade we are all looking for, isn't achieved with neural implants or faster processors.
It's achieved through grace, through moral imagination, and through deep, sacrificial human connection.
And this brings us back to the biblical metaphor of Nehemiah that Pope Leo XIV uses. When Nehemiah looked at the walls of Jerusalem and saw them in ruins, he didn't panic. He didn't flee into the desert to hide from the empire.
He stayed.
He stayed. The encyclical calls listeners to act like Nehemiah. Do not retreat. Stay in the world. Enter the tech companies, the schools, the media organizations, the political institutions, and begin the slow, arduous work of rebuilding the walls of a humane civilization, brick by brick.
We have covered immense ground today, from the coal smog of 1891 to the humming server farms of 2026, from men treated as physical components to men at risk of being replaced by code.
And it all brings us to the central struggle of our age, a struggle the commentary articulated so beautifully, preserving the memory of what a human being actually is.
G.K. Chesterton once wrote in The Ethics of Elfland that we suffer not from a lack of wonders, but from a lack of wonder.
Our machines are wonderful, they are dazzling, but they cannot replace the magnificent, irreplaceable mystery of the human soul.
So, as we close this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over.
The next time you open a prompt box, the next time you use an algorithm to save yourself 5 minutes of difficult thinking or reading or writing, ask yourself a question.
Are you just optimizing your workflow? Or are you slowly, quietly outsourcing your humanity?
What piece of your own magnificent humanity will you fiercely protect from the machine today?
A vital question for all of us.
To everyone listening, whether you are driving, working, or tuning in late at night with the Kansas wind outside your window, thank you for joining us. Keep exploring, keep asking the hard questions, and guard the permanent things in your own life. Please consider supporting the preservation of humane culture, literature, and memory through Chesterton Radio, the Open Door live stream, and the Chesterton Radio Substack. We'll see you next time.